Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in. On this episode of the podcast, Jeffery speaks with Ernie Humphrey, CEO of Treasury Webinars, on the topic of Treasury Success in today's world. With a focus on people and technology, they discuss how the role of Treasury is evolving and key success factors to equip Treasury professionals today.
Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast. This is Jeffery, the managing partner of Strategic Treasurer. Today's podcast is Treasury Success in Today's World, Technology and Relationships. I'm here with Ernie Humphrey. Ernie is a longtime Treasury practitioner who formerly served as a Director of Treasury Services at the AFP. He has spoken on or moderated on over 400 webinars that impact the career success of Treasury, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and FP&A professionals. His webinars are focused on how companies can leverage automation and AI to optimize their cash conversion cycles. Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast, Ernie.
Thank you very much, Craig. It is a pleasure and an honor to be on your podcast.
So our topic today is Treasury Success in Today's World, and it deals with technology and relationships. And I want to begin with how you see things changing in the Treasury world or in finance more broadly. What is changing?
Sure. Thank you very much. I think there's really two pieces here. And when I look at Treasury Success, I look at it in terms of function. So there are things that will never change, things that are changing, and things that are on the horizon. What we're starting to see, I like to call back to the future. So I think as we're getting more visibility into accounts payable, accounts receivable, and bank relationship management, we are going to see more focus and more metrics of success for Treasury around owning that cash conversion cycle. And so I think that's part one. It's kind of back to the future. So I think AP and AR are going to continue to report up through Treasury. And again, I think that's a function of visibility, which is technology. So now we see the great opportunities there. So for payments, we can take control of how and when we make payments. On accounts receivable, we can take more control of how and when we get paid. And on bank relationship management, I'm quite frankly almost shocked when I look at the priority surveys and I see that bank relationship management is down at number 8. When I worked at AFP, it's been a little while ago, but that used to be number 1. We used to have a whole bank relationship management suite. But now that we have visibility, technology, TMSs, bank connectivity software, we really have the opportunity to really develop those mutually beneficial relationships. And then on the other side of it, what's coming and what do we see down the road? It's all a function of how to collaborate across the enterprise. So the CFO's role is changing. They need to own performance across the enterprise. So how do we get the CFO the information that they need to pass along to departmental leaders in order to impact performance? So what are the drivers of performance at the departmental level and then at the company level? So in Treasury, we're going to be more active. We are more active in FP&A, M&A, and also risk management. So in terms of some of the great research that you do there, you've done some research on bank relationship management. I'd be interested to see what you're thinking and what your thoughts are on why that's such a low priority.
Well, I think it should be a higher priority than you certainly just described, and that some people refer to. I just remember before FBAR came out, we've been doing a compliance survey that talked about bank account management, bank relationship management, FBAR. And earlier on, people were like, yeah, we do really well with managing our bank accounts, our signers, the services, and our bank relationships. And then when FBAR came out and they had to pull that data together to say, when does a signer come on? When do they go off? Is that active? Did you confirm that with the bank? What are your balances? People started saying, oh, I guess we don't do a great job with it. And their self-rankings went significantly south. Now, in the intervening years, there have been more people that have been putting in either dedicated bank account management systems or subscribing to the modules of a TMS and have been doing better. There's a lot of room to grow. So I still think there's a lot of room on bank relationship management and bank account management for the majority of companies to improve. So it just might be other things are hotter on the list of we've got more pressures on other technology areas and people are just limping through bank account management.
Right. Yeah. And just to kind of dovetail off that, that's one thing that I see. And the other part of it is, and I used to help manage AFP service codes. Now there's a little bit more opportunity to really understand the codes, but also to do some benchmarking. And that goes across the board in Treasury. even about 5 years ago, we used to have to pay for all this benchmarking data, and now we have that benchmarking data available to us. So I think that the visibility that we now have into opportunities that we might not have known were there. So now we always say we don't know, and now we know some things, and it's good, but it's pretty scary, right? Especially like you said, on just bank account management, who's doing what, why, what are we doing in AP and AR? How are we supporting FP&A? And then there's some interesting technology coming in cash forecasting. One of my strategic partners has just released AI in cash forecasting. And so there's opportunities there as well. And of course, we are seeing Treasury much more involved in FP&A. And so I think we need to align. So it's funny, if you look at surveys, there is a big variance between the FP&A cash forecast and the Treasury cash forecast. And I think as we build relationships across our department with Beyond Treasury, which we'll talk about later, I think that's when we're really going to see those things. It's going to be it's going to be all about relationships and technology. And if you don't embrace technology, you're just going to be left behind.
Yeah. So a couple points on what you started off with, what's happening in the Treasury world and the overall domain. And you talked about bank account management. You talked about the cash conversion cycle, risk, and forecasting. So we've touched on bank account management, but maybe we just talk about forecasting for a moment. You just talked about the difference between, FP&A and Treasury. Typically, FP&A is looking at an income statement forecast, projecting ahead a long period of time. Treasury does two types of forecasts: the cash position type forecast, short-term forecast, a year in or less, 6 months in or less, day-to-day, very detailed to make sure you have short-term liquidity and you're optimizing your actions, and then the overall balance sheet planning to support the organization. What else are you seeing with regard to forecasting? Because you mentioned the cash conversion cycle and AP and AR. Do you see that making a much bigger inroad forecasting what Treasury's doing? Or is it bigger from the FP&A side, or how would you describe that?
I think our forecasting efforts need to be aligned, so we need to create that alignment. And so those short-term forecasts should be of interest to FP&A. And so I'm a proponent of the more direct model, because now we have that information. And so we've got so much information on AP and AR that we can really reduce a lot of the variance. And some of these AI softwares actually predict when payments are going to be made. They're pretty good at it. We can take control of our payments. And so if you look at the variance between the actuals and predictions, we're going to start to see that go down, because we'll have a much better idea. And then if we look at CapEx, that's usually taken separately. But I see us being able to use that short-term forecast and really project out, right, and use those drivers. So we're going to, with this focus on AP and AR, we're really understanding AP and AR. So in Treasury, I think we're always looking backwards. I mean, I used to look at bank account data and, of course, some ERP data. But now with these solutions that we have, AP, we can forecast, AR, we can understand what's driving their forecast, short-term, long-term. And so that's going to really, cash forecasting, as you all know, and I've been on probably 30 cash forecasting sessions. I try to make mine unique, but I haven't done it, but I'm going to have a few. Once I start talking about AI and cash forecasting, and we start to talk about the fact that we really understand AP and AR and drivers and levers, that's going to make the whole forecasting process more valuable across the enterprise. And we'll be able to also understand and validate the drivers of our variances in the forecast as well.
Do you have any comments, in terms of understanding when things are going to pay or collect, what your view is? I mean, there's two things that help make it easier to forecast. One is better forecasting tools, as you just discussed on AI. And the second is better scheduling. When I say better scheduling, it's either you're putting it in place, when it's going to occur, it's electronic. It could be leveraging some of the supply chain financing, some of the tools for making payments, so both parties have better visibility to when things occur. Both of those drive towards this better awareness, both whether you're sending money or receiving money. Didn't know if you had any thoughts on that.
So again, I think the AP automation, what it does, it allows us to create better supplier relationships. And so part of that starts all the way with the supplier onboarding. So what we want to do, as you mentioned, we want to eliminate information asymmetries. And so there doesn't need to be back and forth about what's owed, what's not owed, what's our bank account information. We're waiting for tax forms. And so we are removing the friction from the AP process. And then we also have visibility into, are we even taking the discounts that are available? Many companies don't know that. And then as we become more efficient, we have more opportunities to negotiate that and have some dynamic discounting. And then what we can do, I didn't do this enough when I was in Treasury, we need to own our allocation of payment types. So checks, we shouldn't be writing checks, right? So let's optimize, right? So we can now take more control with better supplier relationships. Like you said, we can control when we pay, we can control how we pay. And some of the systems right now allow us to negotiate. So a few of my clients send me an email when they owe me money and they say, do you want to take this discount? And I can go right back and forth with them and do that. And it almost always makes sense to take that discount. So on the AP side, we're controlling how and when we pay through supplier relationships. Now on the AR side, this is where I think the AI has made much more progress. And so we're starting to be able to identify how to communicate with our customers and then control how. So AR communication is important. In Treasury, we should have some control. We don't want bad communication with our customers. And so we can start to predict who's going to pay, when are they going to pay, what's the best way to communicate with them, how can we mitigate bad debt expense. And so the technology allows us to learn, right, about our customers and also on our suppliers. So the more we know, the more we invest in those relationships, the better off we're going to be. So in credit, what I would see, you'd see the same Dunning strategy, the same approach to each and every customer. And so now we can empower our folks with all the dimensions of that relationship. And so we don't waste time on the phone with either side. And so at the end of the day, what we do, we take more control of how and when we pay. We take more control of when we get paid and how we get paid. And obviously there's some sort of trade-offs there. But again, if we own these relationships, right, we can take more control. And it's a matter of communicating. So if you look at it, AP done right on my side is going to help AR on the supplier side. So if I do it right, I'm going to lower your AR processing costs. So it's about effectively communicating the value of that. And also on the customer side, this is the value, right, in that predictability. And so as we learn how to message those, I like to say the word control. I think I'm like Janet Jackson control, right? AP control, how and when you pay, AR, when and how you get paid. I don't think we've spent enough time in that. And with automation and AI, we can take away a lot of the non-value add tasks in Treasury and spend time in these areas.
Fair enough. You think about the different roles, what people are trying to achieve there. You've got the cash stewardship model. How do I forecast my cash? How do I use it most appropriately? The cash conversion cycle fits into that. The other is process efficiency. How do I make things efficient internally and with my trading partners? And I think what you were just describing, when you think about what causes costs and problems on the efficiency side also has an impact on the cash stewardship model. And part of that is on the cost side, what causes costs, what drives them, it's defects or errors. And that's a massive impact. The other is incomplete information. You've got to follow up and do it manually. And you were speaking to how do we make that more efficient with our trading partners. But I want to move now in the conversation to this changing role and expanding both what we do with relationship management, the cash conversion cycle, risk management, et cetera. What do you see as the opportunity or threat brought about by these changes? Obviously, there's opportunity. But what else might exist there from an opportunity standpoint, and what threat exists there?
My views are pretty clear on this. If you view any of these changes as a threat, then you're going to put your career at risk, in my opinion. So you need to learn to embrace technology. So you can either let technology control your career, or you can use technology to redefine your value proposition. And so as we get more information, and so you should look to become the expert in AI, the expert in technology, the expert in data management. And that gives you opportunities to build those relationships across the enterprise. And so you should see opportunities to collaborate. So in Treasury, if you're not, FP&A doesn't work directly for Treasury, let's talk with them and see how we align on that forecast. If we're in silos and AP and A are in Treasury, how do we work together? And so I view this as an opportunity. So that visibility creates opportunity. And so you need to learn how to collaborate effectively across the enterprise. And I've had to learn this the hard way. So I've done a lot of research in this. I've worked on it. I talked to thousands of people about it. So we need to make sure that we have our technical acumen. But the thing that I want to stress is people and technology skills are not independent of each other. And so a lot of times the technology enables us to build better relationships, whether that's within our own company or outside with networking and our strategic partners.
So you view the threat as just not embracing technology and helping to use that to drive it along, as opposed to the tech is not a threat. But one question I wanted to, when you think about the skill set, so part of what you're talking on, I know you've talked about this and you talk about career advancement and building the skill sets and building relationships, as you mentioned now, and I've heard before. What else do we need from a skill set perspective as you're, talking to treasury professionals, or whether they're in AP or AR? What is essential in addition to what you just said about some of the communication elements?
I think you have to have analytical skills. You have to be able to look at data. You have to be able to analyze data, and you need to be able to make recommendations that impact decisions. So you need to develop an understanding of your business and understand what drives key areas of your business. So what's driving revenues, what's driving costs, and what's driving demand, right? And we talk to our product managers. And so you need to understand the business. The good news is, if you look at Treasury, at least when I was in Treasury, I had visibility across the enterprise from HR, all operations, marketing, sales, and so you need to be looked at as kind of, this is an overused word, but trusted advisor. So you have to be able to do that. And you need to communicate. This is my new phrase: communicate with impact, right? So you can give people information all day long. You can have a business case, but you need to make sure that creates an action. And so what's the best thing you can do? And people sometimes make fun of me for this. I said, go up and ask someone what they want from you. If I could give you anything you want, what do you want? Help them get it. Same with your treasury team. What do you need to be more efficient? What can I do for you? And so those are like the people skills, the technology skills. You need to understand the analytical part. You need to understand the cloud computing, the AI piece. But the good news is all those things are free. And so, go to conferences, go on LinkedIn. If you're in Treasury, look at AP conferences, look at AR conferences, look at operations conferences, look at industry conferences. And so the more information that you have about how your industry works and the dynamics, the more valuable that you're going to be across enterprise. Obviously, I have more energy than most, but that's really the way. I've written an article about unemployment risk management. If you have skill sets across all areas, then that's going to be amazing. The other thing on the technology side, you have to have some computer skills. You need to understand how data is passed back and forth. For example, when you communicate with banks, you need to understand the value, right? What are the formats of those relationships at a high level? What's going on? What's coming on the technology side? And then, of course, we have to have project management skills. So we need to be able to lead projects across departments. And that's something that you have to get experience in, but you have to just really understand how everything fits together. What's the impact going to be on every person involved in the project? And how do you create that accountability? And then the other thing I would say is you need to be able to be a team member as well as a leader. There's not very many people that can do that. So you need to be able to be a team player on a project, interdepartmental or across lines, and you need to be able to manage the project. And that means building consensus. And we'll talk about how to do that a little bit later.
One thing, Ernie, when we talk about there's these changes that have to be put in place, you have to be adaptable, you've got to communicate with impact. Not everyone follows the change process. Some are very resistant to it. They hold back. And you would raise the question of some of the risks there. You raised the point about some of the risks. But how do you bring the team along? Because if the technology passes somebody by, they're not playing with it, they're not learning with it, all of a sudden you get to an environment that becomes foreign to them and they're not caught up. And then they have to move to another area and technology is going to be chasing them their whole career until they're gone. So how can you help bring your team along? What might be something that's practical to endeavor?
Right. So let me start. Let's just use, for example, what we like to call like an AP transformation project, right? So let's just use that as an example. So as we're putting that project together, we want to get input from everyone that's impacted by this project, which is going to involve technology. So you need the first person you engage is the most technically resistant person you have, the person who's going to have the biggest attitude problem with change. And you engage that person right up front and you get them on board and you let them know how it's going to make their job easier and more valuable. You have to help them see how it's going to be valuable to the corporation and your career. And so you kind of got to be a little bit brutally honest and say, if you don't change, it's going to have a negative career impact. And in terms of maybe internally in Treasury, so the way I look at it is if you're the treasurer, your team has a skill set, right? And everyone's going to have different levels of skills. You're going to have your technology guru. Then you're going to have someone that's an amazing communicator that's not really technically there yet. So what we need to do is teach our folks to cross-train each other. And so I want to have my technology guy. Let's have a webinar. Let's all eat pizza. He's going to tell us all the latest and greatest technology. And so I'd look to have kind of each area of importance to my treasury team to succeed. I got my communications guy, my analytical guy, my tech guy, and I facilitate them to cross-train each other. And so I want to level set everybody, right, at a very high level of acumen. Then someone's always above them. And then just teach them the value of educating each other. So everybody has to cross-train. Everybody needs to know. And usually what I've found is people that are technology resistant, when they dip their toe in the water, they just love technology and they're going to be racing out in front of your technology.
Yeah, some people do that. I definitely have run into some people that are resistant till the very end. I think they would stop at nothing to, avoid making change, right? Some people are just resistant to change. And so, like you said, getting them involved in part of the process, either doing a pilot or getting experience with things, can help them along, especially if they're working with someone and they see, oh, this makes my life easier, as opposed to looking to ways to find fault. But some really good points there, Ernie. I want to ask you a question too at the end as we come up towards the wrap up is, what are ways that a treasury professional or someone in AP or AR can leverage technology to help them build and manage these relationships, both internally and maybe with third parties like the bank or customers? What's your advice on that?
So for me, not surprising to folks on this podcast that know me, is LinkedIn. So that's an incredibly valuable tool to use. And there's a lot of free content there. So you can really use LinkedIn to search and find folks of like mind as yourself. And so usually if you reach out to someone, they're pretty receptive to that, especially practitioner to practitioner. So from the practitioner perspective, it's amazing because you want to find someone in your industry that's faced the same challenges as you do. And in terms of technology, I haven't found anything that's more efficient than that on LinkedIn, obviously. So there's a whole process of that. That's a whole nother podcast. So you have to make the connection and then you have to manage it. So once you make a connection, you see if they have a post or you like something that they post. So let's build that relationship. And the same thing can be done with our bank partners as well. And so what I do is with my partners, what I will do is I will write a blog or an article that's relevant to them and I'll mention their name and I'll bring them in, but it's thought leadership. And then they're like, hey, thanks for doing that. And then if they write something, let's say Chase has an article on LinkedIn, I follow Chase and I write, hey, this is a really good article. You should look at that. And so there's ways on LinkedIn to facilitate that engagement. Now, internally, there's a lot more of these chat features. So you can actually have conversations, right, within the software that's called, I don't know what they call it. I think they call it chatting, right? And you can nudge people. And so you can do that. And then also just using things like we are today, like Zoom meeting and GoToMeeting. And so you can have calls, you can have these face-to-face meetings. And so oftentimes putting the face with the name is incredible. So just set up a Zoom meeting or a Skype call, and that face-to-face is absolutely amazing. And you can share the screen. So that helps you build that relationship. But I don't think there's any substitute yet for LinkedIn. And so it takes an investment to figure out how to use it, but it's incredibly powerful. And you can make an impact not only within your company, you can become looked at as a thought leader. It helps you learn. So my advice is leverage technology to help you have an appetite. Learning is a way of life, right? And people need to embrace that. And there's so much out there to consume for free and you can share. And so it's just an organic process and it's very exciting once you invest in that.
So I'm going to try to summarize what you just said. The 3 key areas of technology was learning as a lifestyle. This is podcast, webinars, content on LinkedIn. Second, LinkedIn is a way of being intentional about establishing relationships that have gain for both people. And then finally, be a frequent collaborator using things like Teams or Zoom to share and work together, even if you're not physically in the same location. Those seem to be the top 3. Those sound like really good ideas and advice. So Ernie, any final thoughts as we wrap up? And I do appreciate you spending some time talking about technology and relationships on this podcast.
A few final thoughts would be, number one, I think I made it clear, don't be afraid of technology, embrace it. We really have a once in a generation opportunity to redefine the value proposition, right, of Treasury and finance. And so let's take advantage of that. Don't be afraid. And there's always resources out there to get yourself up to speed. And let's always look for ways to collaborate, communicate with impact, and embrace technology.
Excellent. Thanks again, Ernie.
My pleasure.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.